Hope you can hear me. It's still very primitive, this stream. It's coming from my old iPhone 6. No direct audio into the device either, but I hope you can still understand what I'm saying. Problem is, I still can't use the iMac here for streaming because I was stupid enough to install the beta of the new operating system, and it doesn't work with my streaming software. So, unfortunately, I can't directly see your comments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the YouTube page of the live stream, and then I will just join the chat as a participant, so that at least I can communicate with you. My apologies for this ongoing ordeal. Actually, I hope I am live. Am I live? I don't even see myself live. What's going on here? Maybe I'm not live. Yes, I am. No, I am live. It just took a while for me for my browser to show it to me. So here we've got the YouTube stream. Hopefully that won't start to blurt out sound. All right. I can see myself. That's one thing. I don't really see. Oh yeah, and there's a chat. Top chat. Let's pop the chat out. At least I'll just have a regular window here. I see Steph, Steven, Samuel, Dashi, Adam, Brenda, and a visitor from Belarus. Welcome. I still feel that the camera is a little bit strange. So you see a lot of this wall. A little bit too much. What if I move this a little bit like this? Again, I have to wait for the image on the computer to adjust. Oh, now you see how what a mess this desk is with the dirty handkerchiefs and paperwork and an orange. Oh my goodness. Normally I always hide that. I just push it out of the image so that it appears that I'm always very neat and very clean. I think I've now more or less obtained that result, right? Yeah, I think it's all gone. Now it looks just like as if I am super tidy. I can move the camera up a little bit more, or I have to sit down. Let's see if that works. So I'm constantly having to refer to the stream to see what it does. Yeah, this is probably good enough. Okay. Gonna put this on. Hello, Helen. Hello, George. Mike. It's pronounced like Yoshi, but with a D, so Doshi. Okay. Nintendo pronunciation. And Jorge is greetings from Peru. Very good. All right. So now that we have at least the impression of a tidy desk, I think I can record my podcast, which is what I'm going to do. Helen says, yesterday saw this YouTube channel tradition. How old was Mary, the mother of Jesus, when she gave birth? What age? We don't know. The gospel doesn't tell us. So she was probably very young, probably around 16 or maybe even younger. But there is no historic detail about it, nor does it matter. All right, where are my notes? So again, just to give you the rules, while I'm recording my weekly show, I can't answer your questions. I will get to those questions afterwards, which means I'm going to scroll through all your questions. So no need to repeat anything. No need to keep the caps lock on. I hope you all will behave and listen to each other so that I don't have to intervene. Alrighty, where is my list? Here we go. What time is it? It's 5:30. a little bit too late for my taste, but either record now or record tomorrow when I will have less energy and less time. Hold on. Just gotta improve the audio a little bit. Channel 1. Voice, microphone advanced. Big bottom on. That sounds more like me. Or less like me, depending on what you're used to. Very well. All right, enjoy the show. Of course, it helps if I up the volume of the jingles. Mary of Nazareth had her son Jesus of Nazareth, age 14. Could be true. There were many people that knew Mary. Well, but it's all speculation, Helen. It's all speculation. There is no historical data about the age of the Virgin Mary. So be wary of what kind of websites you consult for information. The best place still to go is Wikipedia. That's where most of the theologians and biblical experts are. And there are lots and lots of sites out there with wacky theories and just crazy, confusing stuff. Yeah, stick to the big channels. That's probably the wisest. All right, here we go. Wait. Oh, by the way, you won't be able to hear the jingles because, well, it's coming. Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of my weekly show. I'm Father Roderick, still recovering from a pretty nasty illness. A little kidney stone caused so much trouble, I have a hard time believing it. But at least I'm good enough, I'm well enough to be behind a microphone. This episode is brought to you thanks to my patrons over at patreon.com/Father Roderick, and I really thank them for their support. If you want to join them, just check them out, and in return, as a thank you, I will give you access to a special extra podcast every week, which is called the After Show. It's a bit more personal, and there may be some other stuff coming in the near future, so go check it out at patreon.com/Father Roderick. Yeah, as I mentioned in my introduction, I've had a rough week. About exactly 1 week ago, I was super sick. I had a very high fever. I had blood in my urine. It's not a very pretty story. Excruciating pain in the lower part of my body. Had to be rushed to the hospital, to the emergency department, and they made a CT scan. Turns out a little kidney stone had caused a major infection, a very complex infection, as they call it, or complicated infection, which also spread. It started to affect other parts of my body. I won't go into detail, and very, very painful. I was put on pretty heavy antibiotics, and now, about a week later, I'm still recovering. I still need to take a lot of rest. But I'm well enough to at least kind of slowly pick up my usual duties again. And especially when it comes to my TV work, I have no choice. There are deadlines and they need to be respected. So I figured since I was here anyway to do some work, might as well flip on the Rodecaster and just do a show just for your entertainment. So hopefully you'll appreciate that. And if not, well, that's not my problem. First of all, I want to go to the world of movies and TV series, and there is some really, really cool news and also a bit of sad news when it relates to Star Trek. You probably already heard it, but for me, it became an occasion to go check out some Star Trek that I've never seen before. So, I just want to share my thoughts about that, and of course we need to talk about Spider-Man back in the MCU. All right. Do I start with the good news or the bad news? Let's start with the good news, and that is Spider-Man is back in the MCU. I think I never really lost confidence that that would happen. Of course, there was a major fallout a while ago that made every Spider-Man fan panic. Sony and Marvel couldn't come to an agreement. Of course, Sony owns the rights to Spider-Man, and Marvel had struck a deal, a temporary deal, to be able to integrate Spider-Man in a couple of their MCU movies. Uh, and unfortunately, both parties kind of didn't get together or didn't come to an agreement as to future movies. And so at one point, and it's kind of hard to always to see who was to blame. It's always about money and about nothing else. At one point, Sony said, "Hey, we're just going to make our own Spider-Man movies again," and most of the Marvel fans were like, "Wait, you've tried that before, and the result was not very good. So, can we please, 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 pretty please have Peter Parker back in the MCU?" Well, fortunately, of course, the pressure of the fans and also the financial gain in the future for of other Spider-Man related movies was enough to convince the parties to go back to the negotiation table, and they struck a deal, which means that Spider-Man Peter Parker is going to be back at least for one more movie in the MCU. And personally, I'm very happy with that because, as you know, the last Spider-Man movie ended with a bit of a cliffhanger. Spider-Man had his reputation destroyed thanks to the fake news of his nemesis, and that set up, I think, a very interesting point of departure for his storyline, as well as his new position in the Marvel group in the Avengers. He was kind of positioned as maybe even a successor to Tony Stark, even wearing his glasses and everything. So definitely there was a handing over of the legacy of the Avengers to the new generation. And it would have been such a shame if in the next movie nobody would speak about Spider-Man anymore because, well, rights. How stupid would that be? So hopefully they'll find a way to give it a good closure, because of course even after this one movie, they will still have to go on without Spider-Man, unless Marvel or Disney decides to buy Sony altogether. But I don't think that's going to happen. But at least we get closure, which I always find extremely important when it comes to these movie series, TV series as well. With all the competition now going on between the streaming platforms, chances are pretty high that we'll see lots and lots of pilot series that will get canceled because of the lack of interest, because there's so much competition. And then you just, as a viewer, as a fan of these series, you're stuck with the story that never gets resolved. I hate that. I really can't stand that. Fortunately, for older series, we do have closure, and one of the great examples of serialized storytelling was Deep Space Nine. It was before Discovery. That was the last that we got of Star Trek, and they started that series while they were still filming The Next Generation. So for a couple of seasons, both shows were on the air, and then Deep Space Nine went on when even when The Next Generation was wrapped up. And it's a really, really good series, totally different from any other Star Trek series that we've seen, because this takes place on a space station, and they're basically stuck there. So there's much more time to focus on character development and on the overall mythology, instead of having to go from planet to planet and meet new aliens and do just the regular, Star Trek duties. I've come to really, really love Deep Space Nine. I had made it until the beginning of the fourth season, and then there was other stuff that I wanted to watch. But of course, last week we heard the sad news that Aron Eisenberg died. at the age of 50, only 50 years old. He was still very young when he acted on Deep Space Nine. He was portrayed as a child, as a friend of the son of the commander of the station, um, and it's a Ferengi kid, but a Ferengi with very different ambitions from his family members. He wanted to be a part of Starfleet, which of course his nearest family did not understand at all. And then ultimately he ends up in Starfleet, which is in Ferengi history something epic. The actor himself was suffering from kidney problems, which I can totally relate to. I think he was on the list for a transplant. Somehow, just didn't make it anymore. It wasn't enough. We don't know the official reason of his death, but I'm pretty sure it's related to that, to the kidney problems that he had. Um, there's been really an outpour of sympathy from the Star Trek community. That's always what I like. It's by the quality of the reactions that you see how much loved someone was, and how much of an example. I saw a beautiful tribute by Will Wheaton on his blog. I'll link to it in the show notes. And Will Wheaton, strangely enough, had never seen Deep Space Nine. Probably because it was a rival show. In a certain way, it was both Star Trek, but he was the kid on the bridge of the Enterprise in the Next Generation, so he never really checked it out. But now, but in real life, he was a friend of Aron Eisenberg, and so in honor of his friend, he's now watching for the first time ever Deep Space Nine, and it's really cool to see his reactions. And it was enough to push me again towards this series, and I'm going to finish it now. Since the doctor ordered that I still take a lot of rest, I will just use my time wisely to go and try to finish the seasons of Deep Space Nine. It helps that one of my favorite science fiction writers of all time was involved in the production and also the writing of the script of Deep Space Nine, Ronald D. Moore. And Ron Moore, of course, was the one who rebooted the Battlestar Galactica series. That's already, how is that, 15 years ago or something like that? It's a crazy long time ago, but it feels like yesterday. And Ronald D. Moore was in the news just recently also because of Battlestar Galactica. You may have heard that there's going to be a reboot of Battlestar Galactica, or so we thought. And fans, understandably, were pretty upset that CBS, for their new streaming platform, wanted to do a total reboot of Battlestar Galactica and ignore everything that Ronald D. Moore had established in his version of the story, and they would go back to kind of more the original version of Battlestar Galactica and try to redo that. Well, reason prevailed. Good news, it is not going to be a reboot. The creator of Mr. Robot, Sam Esmail, has gone on the record on Twitter saying this. I will just quote him. Battlestar Galactica fans, this will not be a remake of the amazing series that Ronald D. Moore launched, because why mess with perfection? Instead, we'll explore a new story within the mythology while staying true to the spirit of Battlestar. So say we all. So it's not a reboot, thankfully. And this to me sounds like the words of someone who respects what has been done by both series, and I can't wait to see what they will do. And of course, this also opens up the possibility for maybe recurring characters or recurring actors, or maybe they will do something totally different. I think that the world of Battlestar Galactica is big enough for something unexpected and something new. But I'm intrigued. The new CBS platform will go on the air, I think, next year, somewhere in March. I'm not sure if the Battlestar Galactica series will be part of that launch right away. And of course, CBS, not very likely that will be a worldwide platform. It may very well be that they will license the show to other streaming platforms like Amazon Prime or Netflix over here in Europe. We'll wait and see. Here on the Peculiar Bunch, we're always happy to tell you everything you always wanted to know about Catholics, but you were afraid to ask. The month of October is, in Catholic tradition, the month of the Rosary, dedicated to the Virgin Mary. So let's talk a little bit about the Virgin Mary. Helen in the chat asked a question about the age of the Virgin Mary. How old was she when she got pregnant with Jesus? And there are actually no official historical resources about that. The Gospels don't go into detail. And that has to do with the kind of storytelling that we find in the Gospels. This is a story that does not really care that much about all the historical details, the dates. There are a few facts in the nativity stories that we've been able to verify. For instance, the year of the count. How do you call it? The counting of the people. There are some places that, of course, are very traceable, but we don't know much about the age of the Virgin Mary. It's likely, that's kind of always has been kind of the oral tradition, that she was still very young. She was engaged to Joseph, and you can look at other data that we have about the age at which normally people would get engaged, and so that may have been pretty young for our standards, so 16, maybe even a little bit younger. According to Helen on Wikipedia, it says that some apocryphal accounts, so that means certainly old stories, but not part of the officially sanctioned Bible stories, maybe because they were written at a much, much later date, or because the contents was not in line with the, let's say, the continuity that you find in the New Testament. But according to some of those apocryphal accounts, she was about 12 to 14 years old when she was betrothed to Joseph. Yeah. You know, for the story and for the Catholic theology of the Virgin Mary, it's not that important. She was young, but what matters most is how she was open to God's invitation. She's a model for Christians of obedience, you could say. And obedience doesn't mean like obedience that we associate that with kids that have to be obedient to their parents, or you have to be obedient in school or in the army, but it has to do with being able to open your heart and your ears for what God wants you to do, and to do it, to say yes to God's plans, which is in a way the vocation of every single person on earth. And God has his plans. He calls us, and he hopes that we will answer, and that we will have an affirmative answer, just like Mary had. And so the yes of the Virgin Mary has always been contrasted by church fathers, and even in the Bible itself, to the no of Eve, the first woman, who actually turned away from God by accepting the temptation that the snake offered her. And so there's a lot of this contrasting stuff. In that respect, kind of stories like Star Wars are very similar to biblical narratives and biblical storytelling. They love to repeat themes, contrast them. You know, where Anakin said no, Luke Skywalker says yes to the light side of the Force, etc. You see that same thematic rhyme in the Bible itself. And so that, and it helps also to understand the role of Mary by looking at her not just as just a girl in those days, but as almost the opposite of Eve. There is something meta about her role in history, and definitely in the history of salvation. So the month of October, just like the month of May, for Catholics are very much associated with the Virgin Mary. The month of May is properly called the month of Mary. The month of October is dedicated to the Rosary, which is maybe one of the most well-known prayers in the Catholic tradition. Of course, the Rosary doesn't find its origins in the Bible. There's no biblical account of an angel saying, well, this is what you should do. You just take some beads and you start praying this and that. And no, the Virgin Mary herself did not pray the Rosary. The Rosary is from a much older, a much more recent tradition in the church, and it is a form of prayer that is very repetitive, but on purpose. So you pray the Rosary, you pray the Our Father, but most of all, you focus on the prayer of intercession that you ask of the Virgin Mary. So this is not praying to Mary. It's very important to understand for people that are not familiar with the Catholic tradition. Praying to Mary, or asking Mary to pray for us, because that is basically what we do, is not the same as praying to God. In the Catholic theology, it's always God who gives grace. He's the source of everything good. And just like Jesus, during his life here on earth, enlisted the help of the apostles, of his disciples, of the people around him, to go help the sick, to pray for the people in marginalized situations. In the same vein, we have the saints that are friends who have lived lives similar to ours, and that can pray for us, can help us through their prayer, through their what we call intercession. Basically means you intercede for someone. You're like in between God and me, and you pass on the requests. And that aspect of passing on is very important when it comes to the Virgin Mary. She is close to her Son, closer than any human being can ever be, because she's the mother of the Son of God. And so it makes sense to go to her if you have a request for prayer, because she knows her Son more than anyone else, so she can guide us and help us to do what Jesus wants us to do. And you see that intercession happening in one of the most beautiful stories of the New Testament, which is the wedding at Cana, where Mary is there with Jesus. It's the first time that Jesus does a miracle, and there is no more wine. And then Mary comes to Jesus and tells Jesus they haven't got any wine anymore. And that is when Jesus performs the miracle, not Mary. That is, I think, a beautiful story that illustrates how Catholics relate to the Virgin Mary. It's not another god or a goddess. And sometimes she's labeled like that by kind of New Agey people, or by non-Catholics that don't really like that tradition. But that wouldn't be, I mean, Mary would be the first one to be very, very uncomfortable with that approach. She is a servant of the Lord. She is there to help, just like we are called to help. And that's why Mary is always presented to us as a model. And if we pray the Rosary, then it helps us to reflect upon life and on what happens in the stories of Jesus and Mary, and try to apply that to our own lives. What are we to do, and can we model our lives on the yes of the Virgin Mary? And that requires repetition, that requires training. And so that is why that Rosary prayer is so repetitive. It's not about the words, it's about these prayers changing gradually, like water dripping on a stone. It carves out our heart. It makes it bigger. It makes it more spacious and more like the heart of Mary herself and of her son Jesus. So that's in a nutshell the Marian tradition in the Catholic Church. I'm reading a new book, or actually listening to a new book, that I'm really enjoying quite a bit. It is an autobiography of a filmmaker. He himself doesn't call himself a filmmaker, by the way, but you know him from his documentaries on TV. He would say, "Well, I'm more of a journalist because I'm not making these TV series, these documentaries myself." Um, I'm talking about Paul Theroux. Paul Theroux is a British documentary filmmaker, and he's about my age. He's actually 2 years younger than I am, or 3 years younger. No, 2 years younger than I am. And in his autobiography, he describes his childhood, which is really nothing special, and how he somehow, almost by accident, kind of fell into this world of television making. And he was a bit of a quirky, nerdy guy, even as a young boy. And he took that quirkiness and that curiosity and also great sense of humor to his interviewing style. So what he's very well known for is that he made documentaries about people on the fringes of normalcy, people with very strange hobbies or passions, uh, people that would take extraordinary risks in their lives. And his approach, documentary maker, was always to dive into the world of his interviewee. He is always part of the story. Is not observing what's happening and then documenting that and then having someone do a voiceover, a narrator. No, he is in the story. He wants to experience what the main character that he's interviewing does for a living, and he's not afraid to push himself to way outside of his comfort zone, and that always, well, very often results in hilarious moments. So he's been the book itself is called "Gotta Get Through This," like Theroux, like his last name. Yeah, sounds like a dad joke, and a lot of the jokes are even about his own jokes. He's very self-deprecating, which makes it really a pleasure to read. And of course, I'm even more interested in this book because I'm a big fan of his documentaries. They're always making me a little bit uncomfortable. That's quality. That's great if a filmmaker can make you feel uncomfortable, and you get to meet people that you would never ever meet in real life. And then there's sometimes also some lessons learned. He doesn't shy away from the hard questions, and also dares to ask his subjects, about the why and how far, and isn't this going too far? So it's always stuff that makes you think. More recently, he's been more serious in his approach. I think he made a pretty big documentary about Scientology, which of course got him into a lot of legal trouble, as usual with Scientology. They always take revenge on the messenger, but he's not afraid, and nor should he be, because he's got such a large worldwide audience. But it's really fun to hear how he prepares his interviews and what are his criteria to select stories to tell. And one thing that made me think was he never wants to play it safe. He never wants to fall into a routine, which is very tempting if you are working in the field of TV like I am, and we have to crank out 15 episodes per season. Then it's like, oh well, let's just do that because it's easy. And he was like, well, if it's easy, it's probably not going to be any good. I need to really push myself outside of my comfort zone. I need to find people that really have a story to tell, that do something unexpected. They have to be in a certain way, appealing, even though they may be very, very different from the world of the viewer. But their life, their choices have to be appealing, have to be intriguing enough to keep people interested. And of course, his motto is always, "I want to be part of that world." So it's documentary making by immersion. That's also something that I'm trying to do in my own stories, more and more actually, um, is to be part of the story, to make it personal, because and that is in a way very similar to, for instance, preaching in church. If what I preach about does not first touch me or confuse me or makes me feel stuff, then nothing is going to happen with the viewer. Whereas if I'm the first one who is impacted by what I talk about, by the stories that I tell, and there is a chance that that will also be the case with the people that are watching it. So this passion that you see with him, combined with a great sense of humor, makes for very, very compelling documentaries, and of course also for very compelling reading. You can find a link to the book in the show notes over at trideo.com. That's TRIDEO.com. That'll probably be an affiliate link. So by your purchases on Amazon, we get a little bit of the credit. And that helps me buy new books to check them out. So thank you in advance for clicking on our Amazon links that you can find somewhere at the bottom of the trideo.com page. All right. It's time to talk about science fiction, the future where there will be no more bandwidth problems, where there's Wi Fi on every planet that you visit. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world yet. I know that there are some problems with the live stream that I always have on when I record it. That's because I'm streaming straight from my phone. And it's an old phone and it's on a Wi-Fi connection somewhere on the fringes of the Wi-Fi signal, probably. So it may be not as good as you're used to, but hey. As soon as Apple has resolved the problems with the beta of their operating system, so it's stupid enough to install macOS Catalina, and the beta completely broke all my streaming software, not just Ecamm that I use, but also OBS and streaming straight from the browser. None of that works anymore. So the only way I can see you, or that you can see me, is through the phone, which is kind of the worst way to stream. All right, let's talk about science fiction. We've already mentioned Battlestar Galactica, but there was also another very, very cool tidbit of news. Feige, you know that name because he's been the running man for almost all the successful MCU stories. He's been heavily involved in producing all the Avengers stories and some of the other blockbusters. And in fact, he was so busy with that rumor had it that was one of the reasons that Disney let go of the Spider-Man franchise. That they wanted to protect Feige a little bit because he was doing so much, and they were afraid that another Spider-Man movie would just break his back. Of course, we have no confirmation of that rumor, and it may be completely bogus because Disney announced that Kevin Feige, the most important guy right now running the MCU and also responsible for most of its success, is going to make a Star Wars movie. Or maybe not one, but multiple Star Wars movies. This, of course, is in addition to all the other Star Wars movies that are already in production. We know that there is a trilogy in the making by the writers of Game of Thrones. We know that there is another trilogy also in the making by the director Rian Johnson of The Last Jedi. And at one point, Disney said, we're not going to bombard the audience with all these Star Wars movies like we did in the beginning because you get Star Wars fatigue. But now we not only have two trilogies in the making, we have three television series, actually four if you count Clone Wars with that. There's The Mandalorian, there's going to be a series about Obi-Wan Kenobi, and there's going to be a Rogue One prequel series on all on Disney Plus. And then, of course, you've got Clone Wars, and I bet you that they have other ideas for television series and maybe even television movies. I'm still hoping that we will see, for instance, a sequel to the Solo movie, but not in movie theater, but on Disney Plus. Why not? They have all these actors under contract for at least two more movies. So I'd say, do it, do it. Let the cash flow through your veins. Um, so apparently, this Star Wars fatigue is not something that is very much on the minds of the people responsible in Disney right now. And Kevin Feige, we know, is a huge Star Wars fan, and he has said, of course, he hasn't said anything about what kind of Star Wars movie it's going to be, but he said that he already has an actor, a major actor, that he wants to center the story around. And of course, has the internet buzzing. Who is that actor? Is it Samuel L. Jackson? Is Mace Windu coming back to the world of Star Wars? How cool would that be? I'm pretty sure that they can figure out a way to explain away that he actually wasn't killed by Palpatine. Um, Although Samuel Jackson is very, very busy with the same Marvel universe, and he's still in charge of the Avengers, so I'm not sure if we'll see him. And I'm thinking, well, maybe it's what would be the biggest crowd pleaser? What would make not just every Star Wars fan, but every movie fan happy in the world? Keanu Reeves seems to be back with John Wick, with the next Matrix movie that's coming out. Everybody loves his not just his acting, but also his whole demeanor. Just unbeatable. So Keanu Reeves in Star Wars. That's just me. And then I'm thinking, well, what could be his? He doesn't feel very Star Warsy. But I'm thinking, well, what if he was like a samurai? He did The Last Samurai. So what if he was like this ancient Jedi teacher, and they would go very Oriental somehow, or go you're more Jedi plus Kung Fu? How cool would that be? I definitely watch it, but maybe it's someone completely out of my imagination. It's just so intriguing, and I'm pretty sure that he mentioned that he already has an actor, because he's about to reveal who that's going to be. This is just marketing. They never say anything without a reason, especially when it comes to Star Wars. So great times ahead, at least I hope. We need to talk about my favorite new technology, and as you know, that is virtual reality. I'm the very happy owner of a Oculus Go, which is the kind of the Benjamin of the Oculus family. Well, last week there was the annual Oculus Connect convention in the United States. Couple of days, I think 2 days, where programmers, developers, and the people behind the Oculus come together for a conference where they kind of plot out the plans for the near future. There was no hardware this time, no new VR headset, just the Go, which was barely mentioned, the Quest, and the Rift. The Rift S is their only virtual reality headset that is still tethered to a computer. And it looks like Facebook, who owns Oculus, is focusing everything on the Oculus Quest, which, according to Facebook itself, has been a major success. And they sell them as soon as they can make them. And what they did during this conference was solidifying that central position in the marketplace. But they came with some really, really impressive announcements. Of course, there's already a lot of great software out there for the Oculus Quest. By the way, I still don't have an Oculus Quest. The reason being that I was very happy with my Oculus Go, and I've even got a way to play some of the Steam VR games like the Elder Scrolls, Skyrim, on via Wi-Fi on the Oculus Go, which is incredible considering that the Oculus Go was just 199 bucks, I think. That's what I paid for it. So it's super low budget, even cheaper than the PlayStation VR. And it's wireless. So what else do you want? The Quest is also wireless, but it comes with two controllers. The Quest is also a little bit more powerful, although that's always relative because these devices use mobile phone chips, usually 2 generations old. So they're definitely not on par with, for instance, what Apple does with the iPhone or the iPad. But we know that that technology is advancing with huge leaps. So it's pretty obvious that in a couple of years from now, these goggles will probably be able to work standalone and deliver the same kind of graphics that you now need a very heavy-duty PC for. Well, what did they announce during Oculus Connect is the Quest is going to get 2 incredible technologies that are going to be added to the existing setup. You don't have to buy anything new. One is Oculus Link, which is the ability for the Oculus Quest to be linked to a gaming PC, which with, of course, a much more powerful processor and graphics unit, and to be recognized by that PC as an Oculus Rift. It's going to use USB-C, which has pretty high level data transfer, to make sure that your computer does all the work, and then sends the final computational images to the headset. That, of course, makes the Oculus Quest all of a sudden a much, much better deal, because it's $499, and you will basically not only have a standalone Rift that you can use without wires, but you just have one single USB-C, and then I think there's going to be a special optical cable later on from Oculus. With one single simple cable, you can have the abilities of the Oculus Rift as well, which of course opens up the device to an incredible amount of games. Not just the games that you can buy in the Oculus store, but I think just recently it was confirmed that it will also work with Steam VR, and Steam is still the platform with the most affordable virtual reality games. So this, I think, makes it possible to play, for instance, Fallout 4 in VR on an Oculus Quest. So I think they're going to sell a ton of these new devices. The second technology that they have announced, still in beta and still will be in beta when it is offered to the consumer, is hand recognition. And I'm not talking about recognizing just the movements of your hands while using the controller. No, the Oculus Quest has cameras that can see the space around the goggles. And they have been able, even though the Quest has a very modest processor, they have been able to develop hand recognition where they can track the fingers. So you don't need any controller whatsoever anymore in the future. This is science fiction stuff. And according to the people that were able to test that software, it's still in very early stages, they said it's a game changer. The fact of not having anything in your hands makes the immersion 100 times greater than when you're using controllers. And of course, it will also lower the threshold for the usage of these virtual reality systems. Imagine that in a couple of years from now, you can just put on a very lightweight headset with very, very wide field of view, great resolution, powered by an internal processor, and no other devices, just your hands. And you can click on things. They're probably also going to bring AR into the Oculus realm. They've talked about it. They have not specified when they will do this, but they are certainly working on it. So that means that you can either be in a completely virtual environment, or it will use those cameras to compose an image that will contain both the reality around you and added information or added graphics or enhanced graphics on top as a layer on top of the 3D environment that you're in. Unbelievable. I'm super excited. I never really thought that they would do this. And for me, it's been definitely a reason to put this on my list. And if I get a Quest, I'll sell my Oculus Go, make some money back through that. Yeah, it's a great time to be alive. And with that, I've come to the end of this episode. I made it. I'm really doing better than a couple of days ago. I made it without too much pain. So thank you so much for listening. Thanks for your patience. It will still take a couple of weeks for me to get better, but in the meantime, you can look forward to seeing me a little bit more in the podcasting realm. Thanks to my podcast supporters over at patreon.com/Father Roderick, and I will see you next week. Take care and God bless. All right, that was the regular show. Hope you all are still awake. And now it is time for the after show. That's going to be tricky because I think if I scroll up to read your comments and someone posts a new comment, it will probably immediately scroll down. We'll see. Yeah, let's just do this. Hey, it's Father Roderick, and welcome to the after show. I'm back behind a microphone after very testing times. I was really scared almost because I was so sick. The fever was high, the pain was beyond anything I've experienced before, all thanks to a tiny little kidney stone that I really didn't expect to be behind a microphone this soon. I'm on very strong antibiotics, and it looks like they've finally started to kick in this weekend. Sunday, I still stayed home out of security. I just didn't want to step into a car. But this Monday morning, I'm recording this on a Monday morning, I woke up, and for the first time in a week, I felt rested. And all the nights before were feverish nights where I was so hot and I had so much pain. This was the first time that I had a good night's sleep. And that's why I felt confident enough to go to the office and record this podcast for you, because I miss you. I really, being sick and not being able to do almost anything, I just couldn't sit for a long time. I couldn't stand for a long time. I certainly couldn't walk. It makes you feel super isolated. Your world becomes very, very small. And I just couldn't find the energy to do like a YouTube stream or something like that to reconnect with all of you. And also was like, well, I'm just not, I don't want to complain too much on social media either. I mean, I posted a few updates so you knew what was going on, but I didn't want to give you like an hour by hour account of how terrible I was feeling, because there was no news in that. I was just feeling lousy. But I'm really, really grateful. It makes you also realize how precious health is, and how often you take that for granted. How often I take it for granted that I can do this work, that I can make these shows, because it can all be taken away from you in a moment, and then you're unable to do anything. I was actually asked myself, what am I good for? It's very weird. Because I couldn't help the parish because I was out of order. I couldn't work on my TV programs. I couldn't update my YouTube channel. I couldn't record podcasts. And then you're wondering, well, but why am I here? What is my purpose? And it took me a while to realize, and in that respect, it was still a very good week, even though I wouldn't do it again. I realized that what I could do and what I should do was to pray. So I prayed a lot that week. because you can always pray, even if you're totally miserable. And I was like under like 3 sheets in my bed. I was cold and warm at the same time, and I had a headache. I was miserable, but I could still pray. So that's what I did. And then I realized that's the only thing that God wants me to do right now. And prayer is also very low energy activity, which at the same time, I believe, has great efficiency. So it's actually a great use of my time. Um, Also received quite a bit of help from the people around me, for which I'm very grateful. So someone came to do my dishes, for instance. They brought me food. They went to get groceries. I got a lot of very, very kind words on Facebook and on Twitter to a lesser extent. People praying for me, encouraging me, giving me good advice. I think I must have at least 500 moms on the internet. Make sure you take your pain medication. Don't be a Protestant. That was the funniest one. Don't be a Calvinist when it comes to pain relief. Just take those pills. Oh, so much fun. So that really meant a lot to me, to know that even though I felt very alone and my world was very small. I talked a little bit about that, by the way, in the episode of The Walk, if you haven't listened to it yet. Also give you some more unwanted medical details about what was truly going on. But anyway, I'll have to check that episode. But even though you don't see many people during the day, and I couldn't because I was in bed most of the time, you still know that a lot of people are concerned and are, kind of with you, even though it's thoughts and prayers. Don't discount the importance of thoughts and prayers in times like these. I wouldn't want to underestimate the effect that it had on my well-being. So as usual, I'm just going to quickly go through the comments that were posted while I was recording the main show. And of course, I've got a lot of questions about Disney Plus. It's glorious. It's really, really good. I love the amount of content that is on Disney Plus. There's always something to watch. It has all the old stuff as well. A lot of the television series, many things that I didn't even watch because, of course, I'm a bit older than most of you, so I'm not very familiar with all the television shows that were played in afternoons. But a lot of you have very fond memories of Disney after they came back from school, or when your homework is done, they would watch Disney, and all of that is there. The Star Wars movies are there, some of them in glorious 4K HDR. It's unbelievable, the quality. Even really old movies like The Black Hole, they're on Disney. They're almost impossible to get on DVD or Blu-ray, but Disney Plus has that movie. It's in very bad shape. It really should be redone, or maybe even do a reboot of The Black Hole. I really love that universe. It still holds up story-wise, doesn't really hold up visually that much. And then, of course, you have a lot of Spider-Man, Marvel stuff. There are also most of the animated series, not all. Spectacular Spider-Man is not on there, which is a shame because it's the best. But maybe in the future, who knows? Monique wants to know if Mysterio's actually dead, or do you think he faked his death? I think he's dead, because every movie needs a new villain, and this one has had his 5 minutes of glory. So no, I think the effects of what Mysterio did to Spider-Man will be felt throughout the movie, but now I think he's dead. Maybe for the comics they will resurrect him, as they always do, but not for the movies. What else have we got? Am I Team Iron Man or Team Captain America? I always thought that both teams were kind of petty schoolyard factions. I'm not Team Iron Man or Team Captain America. I'm Team Avengers, and I will always be. Let's see, what else have we got? Of course, we talked a little bit about Star Wars, and there was something that I wanted to discuss on the show, but I ran out of time, and that is that actually two things. In an interview, no, actually not an interview, in a book, Bob Iger from Disney mentioned that George Lucas felt betrayed by The Force Awakens. What happened when Disney took over the Star Wars franchise? They also got all the rights to do whatever they wanted. They were not obliged to involve George Lucas in it or to follow his plans for the future of Star Wars. But as a courtesy, they when they heard that George Lucas had written 3 scripts for the sequels to The Return of the Jedi, they bought those scripts. I'm not even sure if they were scripts or just overall general stories about what the history, well, how history would unfold. George Lucas has given us quite a few details about what he planned as for the sequels, which he never made. So I'm thinking, well, you could have made it yourself if you're not happy with what Disney did. But after reading what George Lucas wanted to do, I'm so glad that he was not involved in the sequels. Really, he had some wacky ideas about going into the micro cellular universe, and the stories would be about the wills. You have the Journal of the Wills, one of the founding texts of the Jedi religion, and then the sequels would explain that the wills are actually tiny, by macrobiotic, almost bacteria-like entities that actually control the universe because they're force sensitive. And then Luke would still be this lone Jedi living in seclusion. So what most of the Star Wars fans hated about The Last Jedi was actually something that George Lucas wanted to do as well. So, yeah. Inevitable, I think, for the story. But it was so, these stories were so weird and almost looked like midichlorians times 100. And no, I'm really. But then when they bought those scripts from George Lucas, he thought that they would actually follow the scripts, or at least follow the general direction of what he thought would be the next step in the Star Wars universe. And they looked at it and they completely discarded it. And that was actually Kathleen Kennedy, J.J. Abrams, a huge Star Wars fan, very, very respectful. And instead they opted to go for a bit of a rehash of everything that made Star Wars what it is. And I think that was the right choice. Maybe not the best choice, but the right choice. Why Star Wars hadn't been in movie theaters for decades. And we all know that if you want to move forward, when you want to implement change, and change was inevitable for Star Wars, you first need to unfreeze a situation. So what Disney tried to do, what J.J. Abrams tried to do, was to bring the fans back into the fold in a certain way. Let's give the fans what they like, what we know they like. Let's not take any risks, and they didn't, because the Force Awakens is a mirror movie. It mirrors everything that we love about the existing Star Wars movies. It doesn't really push anything forward. And then from there on, once we have the confidence, we have the faith of the fans, we can start expanding. And that's exactly what they did with The Last Jedi. Rian Johnson did what everyone complained about first with The Force Awakens. It's not original. It's just a rehash. It's another Death Star. And then Rian Johnson is, okay, let's change up things. Let's do something that nobody expects. Let's completely, think out of the box. And then the same fans are like, well, he changes everything. This is not Star Wars. This is not what George Lucas would have done. It's not my Star Wars anymore. I will never watch any Star Wars movie anymore. That's really, seriously, that's how a lot of Star Wars fans sound. The worst in Anakin. Anyway, that is, I think, what the plan was for Disney. Is let's just first start off known territory, and then we'll just break out of the box and we'll do something. We'll push it forward. And, well, I'm super happy that J.J. Abrams is at the helm and not George Lucas. If you want to get an idea of why George Lucas should not be in charge of Star Wars stories anymore, go rewatch The Attack of the Clones, which I did just the other day. Oh, brother. Oh, that movie could have used a little bit of the Force because it is objectively a terrible movie. Terrible movie. Very bad dialogue or horrible acting and a story that goes nowhere. It is cringeworthy. I remembered it as an entertaining movie, but oh, I still want to go back to the third prequel, and maybe that will be a little bit better. I remember it as being actually pretty good, but Attack of the Clones, and that was all George Lucas. I think he was personally responsible for tanking the prequels. There are so many choices that we know were George Lucas's stories because he did the director's commentary. And every time I listen to that director's commentary, I think, what were you thinking, George? Why was there no one around you that said, hey, George, why don't you sleep about this another night? You know, why don't we just table this until tomorrow, until you've eaten some donuts, and then we'll talk. What is a movie that every Star Wars fan loves? It's The Empire Strikes Back. Why do we love it so much? Because it's the movie that George Lucas himself was the least involved with. All the stuff that we like is from Irvin Kershner and from the actors themselves that were given free rein while they were shooting the movie. George Lucas had a burnout after A New Hope. Even A New Hope wouldn't be the movie that we know and love without the help of others. The first edit of A New Hope was a disaster. George Lucas himself admitted it, and his wife back then, in those days, did a re-edit of Star Wars, and that resulted in the New Hope that we know. Very fast-paced, no nonsense, whereas Lucas' version was pondering and just incoherent. And so, maybe it's time to acknowledge that George Lucas had some very good ideas, but as a filmmaker, he's just not what it takes for the future of Star Wars. Sad to say it, but I believe it to be true. And I think Star Wars is in much better hands than it would ever have been if Lucas had continued it. And I've said this before, I don't think that Lucas would have made another Star Wars movie. I think he's just too worn out. And I'm glad that we get to see lots of quality Star Wars in the near future. Caden says, I'm so happy to have found your channel. You're such an honest guy. Hey, I try to be. Try to be real. Crimble says, hey, you're not answering my comments. Well, I can only say one thing at a time. I'm not a robot. Were you the guy whose Lego was stolen? Well, I was swindled. I was scammed on the web. I bought a set, the Ninjago City set, paid for it, never received it. So, what do you think about premarital sexual intercourse? Oh my goodness, dear, what a question so late in the evening. Well, the Catholic Church is very clear about that. Sexual intercourse is for people that are married, and because it's a very, very beautiful gift, but it's not something that we can have at our disposal for our personal pleasure for any occasion. So the Catholic Church is very clear on that, and that is true for anyone basically. So I live a celibate life, but doesn't mean that if you're not a priest and you haven't opted for a celibate life, you can just hop into bed with anyone you want, at least if you want to be a faithful Catholic. Of course, there's much to say about that, but there are also very, very good resources online that you could read to find out a little bit more about that. The most important one being the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Google that and just look for the chapters that deal with human sexuality, and you will find, I think, a very reasonable approach, which is not prude or anything, or not. What you say? Oftentimes, Christians get accused of being afraid of sex or something like that. But it's not that. It's all about the dignity of who we are and how God made us and how that kind of makes sense and what it means for the way we live our lives, the choices that we make, the way we use our bodies. So anyway, thanks for the question. Did I know John Paul II? Yes, I did. I actually met him several times in person. He was, I think, very important to my vocation. He visited the Netherlands many years ago when I was very, very young. And it was thanks to his words that I first started to think about becoming a priest. So I owe him. Do I think that Kevin Feige will be the president of Lucasfilm? Will Kathleen Kennedy be fired? Well, you know what? I don't know. I don't work for Lucasfilm nor for Disney. We'll just have to wait and see. Are you going to visit Jerusalem and Bethlehem again? Maybe. Maybe one day. I hope so. I loved it there. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to start wrapping things up. I need to go home, prepare some food, and then rest because I've been working way too much today. Thank you for being a patron and for your ongoing support. We'll talk soon. Take care and God bless. Boop-de-doo. Well done. Thank you so much for stopping by. I don't need to speak in this microphone because you hear me through the microphone on the phone. My apologies for the crappy streaming quality, but this is the best I could give you. Hopefully it's enough. We'll talk soon. Take care. Let's turn this thing off.